In the old days, on the North American plains, there was a young Lakota hero called Fallen Star. In the Lakota language, his name was Wičháἰpi Hiŋťpáya. His father was the North Star, a powerful being who lived in the sky world above the earth. The story of Fallen Star begins in the year that was later named the winter when the fish froze. The ponds and small lakes had frozen solid to the bottom that winter, some of them capturing fish whole. If you cleared the snow and polished the ice, you could see the fish stuck in motion, like by some strange magic. Men dug the fish out in chunks of ice into spring. The summer that followed was as hot as the winter was cold. The story of the boy who fell from the stars took place in that summer when a group of boys were out playing and hunting rabbits. It was the hottest summer any of the boys could remember, but it did not stop them from roaming the forest and playing at hunt and war. They had spent the day before shooting at Haŋbléčeyapi, cactus buffalo, with their bows. Many of them already carried small tomahawks or knives at their belts. Now they went further out into the forest, setting snares and chasing rabbits through the brush. The boys were 11 to 14 years old, and most of them had not yet gone through the vision quest. The air was still, with almost no wind, when a streak of light cut across the sky, a falling star in daylight, and ended in a crash somewhere ahead of them. The ground gave a dull thump. The boys looked at one another and ran toward it to see what it was. They followed the smoke through the trees until they came into a clearing. There, in the middle, was a small crater, and at the bottom of it lay a dead woman. None of the boys recognized her. She wasn't from their village or any camp nearby. In the woman's arms was a baby boy, alive and looking at them in wonder. No one spoke. Then one of the boys scrambled down, picked up the baby, and quickly carried him back toward the village while the others followed. Some warriors went to check the woman's body, but nobody knew who she was. The elders said they had heard a story of a woman who was married to a star being and lived in the sky world in the clouds, and that she and the baby must have fallen from the sky somehow. Indeed, she had been taken as a wife by the North Star and lived with him in the sky world. Up there, she walked among the clouds and looked down at the hills and rivers, thinking of the people she had left behind. One day, when the turnips were in bloom, she went out to dig, even though she had been warned not to touch them at that time. She pushed her digging stick into the ground and turned the earth. And as she did, the ground opened under her. She fell through a hole in the sky. The fall killed her, but the child she carried survived the fall. An older woman took the boy in and named him Wičháἰpi Hiŋťpaya, Fallen Star. The village brought food. Women brought what they could for soups. Men brought meat from the hunt. He was raised by all of them, passed from lodge to lodge, part of every fire. From the beginning, people saw that Fallen Star was not like other children. He aged and grew much faster than his Lakota relatives did. In just 4 years, he was already a teenager. He ran faster, learned quicker, and did things that had no easy explanation. People began saying what they had already been thinking. The light of the stars in him was showing. In time, his deeds would make him a great hero remembered by the Lakota. He listened when the elders spoke of the buffalo, of the rivers, of the old wars. Most of all, he listened when they spoke of the stars, for in their shining he felt something stir inside himself, like a memory he could not name. He seemed to know things he had never been taught and would speak of dreams in which he flew above the camp, looking down on the teepees like small white stones. Time passed and another winter came. The people watched the sky and the winds the way they always had. They watched the north, most of all, the home of Wazíya, spirit of the north wind. Wazíya was a giant, the strongest and most dangerous of the winds, with a breath that could freeze flesh into stone. When he was in a bad mood, the cold cut deep, the snow piled high, and food became hard to find. That winter, Wazíya pressed down on the people and did not let up. The buffalo stayed far from the camps. The wind did not shift. Snow covered the grass and then crusted over so that even the animals struggled to paw through it. Hunters came back with little or nothing, and the food stores dropped a little more every day. Around the fires, hunters said that Wazíya was holding the game back and tightening his grip, and that they would not survive if something did not break his hold. Fallen Star watched this. He saw that the children and elders were hungry and that their hands shook from the cold. He listened to the adults talk about Wazíya and say there was nothing to do but wait, that this was how winter was. At last, he stood up and said he would go and face the North Wind Giant himself. He quietly dressed for the cold, took up his weapons, and walked straight out of the camp into the wind. No one followed him. They stood at the edge of the village and watched until the blowing snow hid him from sight. The farther he went, the worse it became. The air cut his lungs. Ice formed on his eyebrows and lashes. Snow blew sideways, then in circles, as if something out there was turning the whole storm by hand. He walked until the world narrowed to white and a dull roar in his ears. That was where Wazíya's power was strongest. There he stopped and called Wazíya out. He spoke to him not as an ordinary man, but as the son of a star who would not stand by while his relatives froze and starved. The wind rose in answer. The cold deepened until the air itself seemed solid. Fallen Star decided to trick Wazíya. He challenged him to blow with everything he had, to show his full strength. The giant unleashed his breath with full force. Fallen Star raised his hands against it, catching the blast between his palms. He turned his hands inward, compressing the storm into a tight, whirling mass. He held the full strength of Wazíya straining between his hands, then hurled it back at the giant. Wazíya, having poured all his power into that single blow, was unprepared. His own cold struck him instead. Lakota storytellers sometimes tell different versions of the story. However it is told, the end is the same. Wazíya's grip is broken and the winds ease. The terrible cold releases its hold on the plains. Clouds thin and the sky starts to open in places. Buffalo and other animals slowly begin to move again. Tracks appear where there had been only wind-scoured crust. Hunters follow those tracks and come home carrying meat. Fires burn longer. People eat and begin to gain their strength back. After that winter, Wazíya still brought the cold season, but he did not get to keep everything for himself. Hunters later spoke about how Fallen Star had gone out into the teeth of the north wind and pushed back, and that was why they were still there to tell the story. Time passed. Fallen Star continued to grow in skill and did many miraculous deeds for Lakota people. Then another threat came, not from the north, but from the sky. Far off, above the prairie, people began to see a monstrous red eagle. It was not like the hawks and eagles they knew. This eagle was gigantic, with wings broad enough to throw the ground into shadow and eyes like burning coals. It started taking young girls from the villages, dropping out of the sky with a horrifying shriek that broke like thunder and carrying them up into the clouds. The first time it came, the people were caught off guard and a girl was taken before anyone could shoot an arrow. At first, everyone thought that it might be a single disaster, but the bird returned. Each time it appeared over the camp, it seized another girl, and with every loss, the fear in the village deepened. Families watched the sky and kept their daughters close, but there was no warning for when the bird would strike. Fallen Star heard what was happening and saw the grief in the camps. When no one else could stop the red eagle, he said he would go out and face it. He went eastward alone, toward the mountains where the sun comes up and dawn first touches the land. For a long time, nothing happened. The prairie lay quiet around him. Then the light changed and the air went still. The red bird dropped out of the clouds, shrieking, diving for him with its talons. At the last moment, Fallen Star shifted aside and shot. The bird missed. Its talons tore into the earth where he had stood a moment before, throwing dust and stones into the air. He drew the bow to its full strength, and the arrow struck close to the bird's heart. The great bird shrieked and beat its wings, lifting back into the air to strike again. Fallen Star shot again and again until the bird faltered and fell from the sky, smashing into the earth hard enough that the ground shook. Red feathers flew and drifted slowly down around him. The monster was dead, but the girls did not return. Fallen Star walked among the fallen feathers and called out, but there was no answer. No footprints led away from the place. No voices came from the grass. Later that night, a small, tight cluster of 7 stars stood out more sharply than before. From then on, Lakota tradition held that those were the stolen girls, gathered together in the sky above the camps. The cluster, known today as the Pleiades. Another time, a group of Lakotas were returning to the Black Hills from the northwest. Toward the end of the day, they made camp, as was their custom, while the men went out to hunt and the children ran and played near the new lodges. A group of girls wandered farther than they meant to, their laughter carrying them beyond the sounds of the camp. They did not notice how far they had gone until the forest grew quiet and the birds fell silent. When they looked around, they found themselves surrounded by bears. The animals were large and powerful, closing in on them without haste. The girls yelled and screamed, but they were too far from camp for anyone to hear. The bears moved closer. There was no path back. Then a young but powerful voice called to them and told them to stand upon a small mound of earth nearby. The girls obeyed. Fallen Star had remembered his relatives and came to their aid. He spoke to the ground and commanded it to rise. The earth beneath the girls heaved upward, lifting them higher and higher as the bears lunged below, claws raking at the stone while the ground surged into the sky and hardened as it rose. The column drove straight up above the trees, stretching taller with every surge of its ascent. And as the bears struck and tore at its sides, great slabs of rock broke loose and crashed down upon them, killing them. When at last the rising ceased, a tower of stone stood alone against the sky, and around its base lay shattered rock. Lakota tradition holds that beneath those stones to this day lie the bones of the bears. Now the girls stood upon the summit high above the earth with no path down. Fallen Star asked each of them what bird she loved most. One by one, they named them. Then those birds came from the sky in great flocks, circling the tower and settling upon its heights. Each bird took one girl upon its back and carried her safely down to her people below. That tower still stands. In Lakota, it is Mato Tipila, the Lodge of the Bears. In English, it is called Devil's Tower. Wičháἰpi Hiŋļpáya stood against giants and raised stone into the sky. But he was also a Lakota boy growing up among his relatives on the plains, learning early how to ride, how to hunt, how to suffer the cold, and how to stand alone on a hill waiting for a vision. In spring and summer, a boy wore very little, a soft deerskin breechcloth over a belt, moccasins on his feet, skin bare to wind and sun. Porcupine quill designs on his belt or moccasins were not just decoration, they showed his family and his nation. In winter, he pulled on long leather leggings and a buckskin shirt, wrapped himself in a buffalo robe, and stuffed fur into his moccasins. That robe was his main shield against cold, keeping him alive in weather that would kill the unprepared. By his early teens, he carried a stronger bow and a full quiver of arrows. On war parties, he might also handle a lance, a coup stick, or a small shield painted with designs from his own dreams or from his father's visions. Hair was sacred, a visible extension of the spirit. A teenage boy most often wore 2 long braids, sometimes with a forelock pulled up into a small crest or a top knot at the crown. Bear grease or buffalo tallow kept his braids neat and protected them from weather. Lakota games leaned toward hunting. A boy would carry a small bow before he was strong enough to draw a war bow. He set snares for rabbits and birds and practiced by shooting at small targets on the ground just to feel how the string jumped in his fingers. Around 10, he was on his own pony, trailing the men on hunts. A famous chief, Sitting Bull, killed his first buffalo when he was 9 or 10 years old. One game called Wičhá¥ or Cactus Buffalo used a bundled cactus rolled or dragged to represent a small buffalo. Boys took turns shooting at it with blunt or light arrows. When an older youth suddenly charged in, they had to dodge, scramble, and keep their footing, learning how to move under pressure. In winter, when snow made the prairie hard and bright, they played a hoop and arrow game. Wooden or rawhide rings were sent rolling fast over the crusted ground while boys sprinted alongside, loosing arrows at a moving target and trying not to fall. They also slid on ice, wrestled, and raced until lungs burned and fingers went numb, learning how their bodies worked when the air itself hurt to breathe. Some games slid directly into ceremony. In Wičhá¥ the throwing of the ball, a specially prepared ball was cast toward each of the 4 directions and then high into the air. Children chased and reached for it, feeling power cast out, rising and falling back to earth with the movement. A young Lakota boy grew up hearing of the 7 sacred rites. Here we will look closely at 2 of them. Before a war party, a big hunt, or especially before a vision quest, a young Lakota would take part in Hiŋļpáya, the sweat lodge ceremony. It was a purification rite where people prayed, sang, and endured intense heat and darkness to cleanse themselves physically and spiritually. Men bent willow poles into a low dome, covered it with hides, dug a pit for hot stones, and heated those stones in a separate fire. Inside, it was cramped and completely dark once the flap was closed. Water hit the hot rocks, steam rolled over their backs, and prayers were spoken over the Hiŋļpáya. The heat was hard enough that a boy had to push through the urge to crawl out, and when he finally stepped back into the cold night air, he was ready. The time for solitude had come. For a boy about to go on Haŋbléčeyapi, this was the last shared space before he was alone. Haŋbléčeyapi, crying for a vision, was one of the most important rites of passage for a Lakota boy becoming a teenager. He would usually go on a vision quest between the ages of 11 and 13. When he felt he was ready, a boy brought a filled Hiŋļpáya, the sacred pipe used in prayer, to a Wičhá¥ a holy man, and asked to be sent for a vision. The holy man decided whether he was ready, agreed to guide him, and promised to interpret whatever came. A seeker in Haŋbléčeyapi went alone to a sacred place marked by a circle prepared by helpers, bringing only a robe or blanket and the sacred pipe. He fasted from food and water and spent 1 to 4 days praying and waiting in silence, opening himself to dreams and to the powers of Wakan Tanka, the Great Spirit. At the end, he returned and recounted everything to the Wichasha Wakang, who helped interpret whether what he had experienced was truly a vision and what it meant for his life. Spirit helpers most often appeared as animals who acted like people. They spoke, sang, or moved in unmistakably meaningful ways. Tatanka might appear as a great bull that stood firm against a storm, calling him toward the role of provider and defender. Mato might bring bear medicine, raw courage, endurance through pain, and knowledge of plants and healing. Wangbli might land and give him a song, tying him to farsight, leadership, and the upper world. Shungmanitu Tanka might show him how to circle an enemy camp or read tracks, steering him towards scouting and strategy. A helper might also give him a power song to call that spirit close, or show him herbs and patterns to paint on his body or shield for protection. Not every vision was simple. Some boys saw the 6 grandfathers and the thunder beings, or long-ordered scenes filled with symbolic meaning. One of them was Black Elk, who, as a boy, received a great vision of that spirit world, and later became a respected Lakota holy man and healer. However, not every boy received a vision during Haŋbléčeyapi. If nothing came, he still descended and reported that honestly. The days of fasting and praying still counted, and he could seek a vision again in the future. When his time was done, the boy sat before the Wichasha Wakang and retold everything in order. Animals, landscapes, songs, words, even the details he thought too strange or unimportant. A vision could set a direction. Tatanka might mark him as a future provider and defender. Mato could draw him toward both fighting and healing. Wangbli could point toward leadership and ceremonial responsibility. Shungnitu Tanka could steer him toward scouting and war party strategy. If his vision was filled with the thunder beings, the 6 grandfathers, and long symbolic journeys, elders might recognize in him someone called toward sacred work as a Wichasha Wakang, trained more in ceremony and healing than in raids. By around 12, boys like Flying Hawk at Singte Gleshka, who later fought at Little Bighorn, could already be pulled into defensive fights when enemies struck the camp. Around 14, many joined a formal war party as junior participants. Tatanka Iyotake, Sitting Bull, rode against the crow at about that age, carrying a coup stick from his father. Thashunke Witko, Crazy Horse, was raiding enemy horse herds while still a young teen. Boyhood ended early on the plains. On a war party, a teenage boy began in support, but stood close to danger. He guarded the horses, scouted ahead, watched the flanks, carried gear, and moved where he was told. When the moment came, he could strike coup, touching a live enemy with hand or stick, often considered a greater honor than killing. Over time, repeated deeds allowed him to speak in council and seek a place among the Akichida, the warrior societies that enforced discipline and order within the camp. Before battle, warriors greased their bodies and painted themselves. Red marked life and strength, black marked readiness for war and connection to the powers of the West, wind, storm, lightning. Symbols were statements, not decoration. a handprint for hand-to-hand combat, hailstone dots for the protection of the thunder beings, a lightning bolt for the power of Wakingyang. Paint could also signal rank within the Akichida. Feathers were earned the same way, through visible deeds. A first act in battle, killing an enemy, counting coup, or returning wounded but alive, could earn a boy his first eagle feather. A plain feather might mark a kill or an important exploit. A red-dyed feather showed he had been wounded in battle and survived. Each feather was a specific war record tied into his hair or scalp lock, not an ornament he could claim at will. By his teens, the feathers in his hair could already tell the story of a young warrior. At birth, a boy might carry a simple birth order name like Chaska, first son, Hiŋļpáya, second, Hapi, third, Changtan, fourth, or Hake, later son. It marked his place among brothers, nothing more. Later, a sacred name could be given in ceremony, often tied to a prayer or a dream from an elder. But the names that endured usually came from what he saw on the hill or what he did afterward. An animal that appeared in a vision was not decoration. If a boy's vision was marked by Shungmanitu Tenka, Great Wolf, people expected sharp perception and discipline. If Mato appeared, strength and healing walked together in his name. If Wangbli touched him, leadership and responsibility followed. A name carried medicine and expectation. Honor names followed public deeds. A boy might receive one after counting coup or proving himself in battle. Tathanka Iotake, Sitting Bull, had earlier been known as Hunkeshni, slow, and also as Jumping Badger before taking his father's name after distinguishing himself in combat. Thashunke Wheatco, Crazy Horse, was first called Curly, or Light Hair, for his naturally light curly hair, and later took his father's name after showing bravery in war. Names could also come from moments of failure or embarrassment. A boy surprised by a bear and scrambling up a tree might be given a name, runs from bears, that stuck for a time or for life. By adulthood, a Lakota man could carry several names: birth order, sacred, teasing, honored. Together they marked his visions and the deeds he had done in front of others. Names could shift again after great battles, powerful visions, or periods of mourning. This was a glimpse into a young Lakota path from boyhood to vision to war and to a name carried for life.